Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of Five Alarm Task Force. We are very fortunate this morning to have two of the generals of fighting back against that which is improper, which is dangerous, and can be death-causing. Hate to say that, the opening of a show. My guests are Miranda Spivack. Miranda is a veteran reporter and editor who specializes in stories about government accountability and secrecy. Really? We have accountability and secrecy in our government? She spent 20 years as an award-winning editor and reporter for the Washington Post, a former Fulbright scholar and distinguished visiting professor of journalism at DePauw University, and the author of Backroom Deals in Our Backyards by the New Press. Her work also appeared in the New York Times, USA Today, and Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting and the McClatchy newspapers. We'll be talking about her new book, but before I get to that, we also have to welcome our frequent guest, Diane Cotter. And if you've been an avid listener or viewer of the podcast, you know that I thankfully got connected to Diane back in 2016 when this carcinogen issue first reared its ugly head. And I've been along on her ride. She rides the lead horse. I kind of clean up afterwards. But against everything that we've, as firefighters, current and former, and those who we've lost, may their memories be for a blessing, because of the gear that we wore, and the gear we still wear today in many departments. But changes are coming. And that I can tell you because we're seeing it in mails almost every day from the people that we can trust, telling us the truth. Miranda will be publishing her book, Backroom Deals in Our Backyards, which will be published on May the 6th. A growing problem of all Americans should be aware of, while also capturing the spirit of true democracy by shining a light on the ordinary people whose concerns for their families and communities propelled them to action. In the great tradition of Studs-Terkel, Backroom Deals in Our Backyards elevates the voices of people who aren't adequately represented in the mainstream media. Notably, the people featured in the book took on the essential work of uncovering the ways in which businesses and governments try to outrun ordinary citizens. They did this despite having no formal training, little legal support, and few resources beyond other members of their communities. Together, their stories serve as an incredible blueprint for anyone interested in protecting the health, safety, and agency of their communities. The work celebrates the ideal of equal justice for all, which Studs and Ida Terkel embraced throughout their lives. Now, when she received this award, we want you to know what the prize was given for. Most Americans are likely to encounter the effects of government malfeasance or neglect close to home, from their governors, mayors, town council, school boards, police, and prosecutors. In fact, deals shrouded in darkness are regularly made at the state and local levels, often the result of closed-door discussions between governments and industry, without any scrutiny whatsoever for the public. Too often, as this groundbreaking new work of investigative reporting reveals, residents are intentionally keeping on the outside, struggling to get information about significant issues affecting their communities, from car crashes and dirty drinking water to failing safety gear, until the backroom deals are done and it's too late to challenge them. A work of riveting narrative nonfiction based on years of original reporting, Backroom Deals in Our Backyards tells the story of 5 accidental activists, people from across the United States, who started questioning why their local and state governments didn't protect them from issues facing their communities, and why there was a frightening lack of transparency surrounding the way these issues were resolved. The secret deals, lies, and corruption they uncover shake their faith in government, but move them to action. Miranda, first of all, congratulations on winning the Studs and Nada Turkle Prize. It is not an easy climb to get there, but we offer our sincere congratulations on you done that. But now, what we need is to talk with you and tell us about what was the ignition point for you.
Yeah.
And what brought you to go ahead and write this book.
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to be on the podcast and be on with Diane Cotter, who, of course, is the real general of the cleaning up the turnout gear issue. I'm just a foot soldier who followed what she was doing to write about it. So, like a lot of things in life, something happened to me. I am and was a journalist at I'm not at the Washington Post now, but this book sort of has its roots in some work I was doing at the Post. And I was writing about a suburban community where ultimately the county executive went to prison for corruption. But this is before that. And, I was just doing what reporters do, which is, I want to see the outside contracts that the government has. Who do you have them with? What are you spending on outside contracts? How does that affect your tax rate? How does that affect, the services you're delivering? Why do you have outside contracts? Anyway, so these in every state, by the way, in case you're interested in querying your local government, these are a matter of public record. I mean, when public money is spent on something, it's the documents that go along with that 99% of the time are a public record. And actually, you shouldn't really even have to ask for them. In an ideal world, these things now are posted online and you can just find them and look what you're looking for. Companies want this information too, because they want to bid for a contract and they want to see what the terms are of the contract. I mean, it's not just journalists and it's not, individuals. But anyway, so I got a lot of pushback from this government and, every single thing I asked for, they made me file a written records request. And in Maryland, where I was working, the law allows them 30 days to respond, and they don't even have to give me the documents. Then they can say, oh, we got your request. We're working on it. These laws are very loose and very hard to enforce. So, sort of coming from that, I started to think, okay, it's not just going on in this one county. Let me ask my colleagues from around the Beltway and the Washington area what's going on. And of course, to some degree or another, other people were encountering the same problem. And then residents of the communities that I was covering were also coming to me and saying, I need this piece of information for my homeowners association. I can't get it. I need this because I want to challenge my tax rate. I can't get it. And it just started really, this seemed like a very acute problem. And so, fast forward many years, and I left the Post 11 years ago, I just was very concerned about this lack of transparency at the state and local level. Where I am in Washington, D.C., there's huge interest by journalists in federal issues and federal transparency or lack thereof. Of course, we're seeing a very acute situation now where data is being taken offline, whole agencies are being dismantled, the information that they carry is disappearing. But for the longest time, nobody was really paying attention to state and local governments that were also doing this. And I was fascinated by that. First of all, I thought it was an information gap for the public. Secondly, is that the thing you just read, Steve, says, most people don't interact with the federal government. Maybe they do for Social Security or for some other reason, but most of your contact with government is going to be at the state and local level. And what goes on there is very important. And it's been largely ignored by the mainstream media, of which for a long time I was a card-carrying member. So, and not only that, local news is dying all around the country. And so there's just very little oversight of what local governments are doing. And they do a lot, and they spend a lot of money. And, we should know where it's going and what they're choosing to spend it on. So it really was that simple. And then, of course, to tell a story like this, nobody cares. I'm a journalist and I have problems getting information. And, journalists tend to whine too. And I didn't want that to be part of the story. And so I thought, well, this is happening to, I hate the word ordinary citizens, which is what my publicist used, but, that is sort of what it is. Diane's not a professional investigator. She could be now, but she didn't start out that way. And, I figured there are issues out there that I don't even know about that are happening and where people are fighting hard to get information in their communities. And they're having challenges. They learn how to do it. The 5 people in the book, Diane among them, are self-taught at this, and none of them were community activists before it started. It just, something happens to you. As I said, something happened to me. And suddenly you realize there's some problem there. And it may only be me. I may be only the one who's going to step up and challenge. And of course, then, as Diane has done, you can build a network. You can use all kinds of ways to find out that this problem is way more widespread than in Worcester, Mass, where she first discovered it. And it takes off from there. Diane's story to me is just fantastic in so many ways because she is self-taught. She is very persistent, which you have to be. And, she bumped up against corporate secrecy, union secrecy, government secrecy. Everybody was arrayed against her and she didn't give up. And of course, now, we're where we are on this issue of poisons and turnout gear. So that's how it all started.
Okay. Let's start with the section with Diane, since she's with us today.
Yeah.
Tell me what brought you to say, I've got to include Diane Cotter in my book.
Well, I know diversity, equity, and inclusion are dirty words these days. However, I wanted my book to be very representative of a broad swath of the population. So yes, I looked for women. I looked for people of color. I looked for white men. I looked all over the place. I just figured, to tell this story through the eyes of one group or one gender or one community really wasn't enough, that people to relate to this book needed somewhere in there to see themselves. And so, Diane is, let me think. I think at this point, there are other women through parts of the book, mostly in the conclusion, but Diane's is, I think, if I'm remembering this correctly, which I believe I am, she's one of 5 people whose experiences are really, comprised full chapters of the book. And she is the only woman, as it happens. Wow. So, I'm looking, but she also had a great issue, and the substance, obviously, what she was doing is way more important than who she is. But I was looking for diversity of issues, diversity of geography, diversity of people. And I think that's the best way to tell a story like this because it affects everybody.
Exactly. We have approximately 1.4 million firefighters in this country. Basically 75% of those are volunteer.
Wow.
So we have great paid departments.
Number.
I know just watching Northwood's Law, the repeats of Northwood's Law, they were in New Hampshire for 7 seasons, I think they did in New Hampshire. And, I've seen a lot what looks good and seen some of the dark side of New Hampshire. I grew up in Massachusetts. I was at a camp outside of Concord for 5 years as a kid. I started when I was 10 years old going to that camp. And I loved it. The Old Man in the Mountain and the Flume and all these places that were great for kids. But I think that having been holding on to the saddle as Diane was galloping into this, I knew that this was something that affected me. Even though, I only was able to serve for 8 years before I was injured, and disabled from the fire service. But the fact is, it's always remained important to me, and I I have followed it to the best of my abilities since I came out of the fire service, and that happened in '85. So to learn more as I kept reading and stuff, and then all of a sudden hearing from nowhere about this issue with Paul, this came up. I think I saw it initially in might have been in the firefighter Firehouse Newsday. Could have been one of those, but no, it was a person who told me about it. I forget who it was who introduced us. It wasn't Jason, because Jason didn't come on the show till well afterwards. But fact is that I heard what she was talking about, and I reached out to her through the person who introduced us, and she came on her first podcast, which was audio only back in that time, and I became engrossed because it affected me, affected my wife, it affected my kids. Now they're grown women now, but we don't know what this is going to do, what it's already done that we don't even know about. And I think that just hearing the intro in your beginning, I think basically you're two cut from the same cloth, that you want answers, you want the correct answers. Sometimes the correct answer is no. Okay, I'm willing to accept that, but this is what needs to be done, and climbed every that. And so we got together online numerous times, and I probably several hundred emails back and forth to each other.
Easy.
And I became very vocal about it on the show. People said, "Well, why are you doing that?" It's why. He says, "Well, they're not. The companies aren't." He said, "I don't care about the companies. They're making their money. We got to do what's good for firefighters, not the companies. They know what they did. NFPA knows what it did. It still doesn't care. Still doesn't care. So how can the organization that basically steers and guides all the fire service services that we provide not know about this issue? Or, and I'm going to say probably in reality, they knew about it from the get-go. We picked up information that DuPont and one of the other companies knew that they were making something using carcinogen, a proven carcinogen, but they threw it in anyway.
Right.
They threw it in anyway. We don't know if we could even. I don't think we could even. We could ask for. We could ask for documents from NFPA, but I'm sure they'd find a way to not reply or not give us that information. But that's what really irked me, because I wore that gear for 8 years. Yeah, off, on, off, on. And then I really worried, what have I brought to my home? What have I done to my family? Now, I finally did get a test not this past summer of 2024. And my hematologist took care of that for me. I asked him to. And he had never heard about the carcinogen issue in fire gear and PFAS and PFOS. But I educated him. And he got very interested in it. He now asks every new patient, have they or are they a firefighter, or have they been a firefighter? Because he wants to test, looking around for that. I came out clear. I was very lucky. But it doesn't mean I'm done with it. Because he said, probably in 5 years, I want to do another test again. So he's following along. I got him turned on to it, thank goodness. And he's following along with working with the school at the health unit at University of Miami Comprehensive Cancer Center, and Dr. Caban Martinez, who
A good friend.
as a dear friend, right? And he has been, I think, as long as we've been knowing each other, I think he's been
Yes.
working on this issue.
Yes.
to get somewhere with it. But again, as you brought out, so much of this is hidden behind the black curtain. You don't want to interrupt the great Oz inside that curtain. Well, you know what? As we saw at the end of the film, yeah, somebody found out about what's going on, and they want to do something about it. And with Diane and Paul's and her whole group that she's put together across the country, probably into Canada too, I would imagine, because I've had the opportunity and pleasure of interviewing some of my colleagues from Canada. And we see that this issue now has gone international.
It is.
As it should have. As it should have.
Yeah.
And we have to worry about our brothers and sisters in Europe and in Asia. You know?
Great article this week by allies in Italy on in their fight and their awakening of the firefighter turnout gear PFAS issue.
Right. So that's I'm sorry, go ahead.
I really wanted to say, Steve, I'm always grateful when anyone asks to speak to us, but particularly when it's someone like you who has been with us since the beginning, because those were the dark years, and it was very hard to get into the mainstream fire service media. So thank God, without the likes of yourself and John Marr and Frank and PJ and Bobby Halton, it really wouldn't have happened the way that it did. There's, as Miranda goes into in the book, the hierarchy from within the fire service itself dictates who and when the subordinate groups can speak on issues. And I didn't realize that coming into this. I, recognized myself as a firefighter's wife, and saw myself as no alliance with any group or organization other than my husband and his local. But there was absolutely a hierarchy. I can tell you in the early days in 2017, I remember speaking to a high-ranking officer from within the IAFC, the International Associations of Firefighter Chiefs, pleading with him, why can't they do something? And he said, we don't do anything until the international does something. And that's how it's done.
Right. And we know who that president was during that time.
Correct.
Of the IAFF, and tried to blindside you at every turn.
Correct. Yeah, 100%.
And so thank goodness we have a new general president.
The best.
Who's been on our webinar. He's been on an interview, and he has been, and I grew up in the greater Boston area, so I've seen a lot of the Boston fire chiefs. And to me, what he brought to the game, so to speak, was invaluable.
Absolutely. Ed Kelly didn't start this change, the sea change within the union when he took over in January of 2021. He literally went to Dr. Peasley prior to that. He went to Dr. Peasley prior and he said, I want a study on the PFAS and the gear. Who's the best in the world? And Dr. Peasley said, well, I'm very good, but Jennifer Field is the best in the world. And he said, well, I want her. So that is where the second study that was done after our June 2020 study, the second study is the IAFF study, but I'm giving full credit to Ed Kelly because he organized and orchestrated that.
Diane, how was that funded? Was that with federal funds?
Now that I don't know, to be honest with you, I really don't know. That was Oregon University Oregon State University. So a lot of the funds for turnout gear are a combination of federal funding, state funding, in federal fundings like the SAFER grant, et cetera, and through direct funding within the institutions themselves.
So without a doubt, this was a gut punch for all of us to find out. But as we said, a brave knight on a white horse came marching in. It was President Ed Kelly. And he didn't mind, kicking ass.
No,
And
he didn't.
that's the person we needed at the helm after all those years and the alleged corruption that was going on at the IAFF.
Correct.
And all his, you think about all his appearances on the old Jerry Lewis telethon. Well, the fact is, they gave the money, but nobody really knows where it came from. And he always walked on stage, and Jerry always gave him this great welcome. But then, 2016, we find out we peeled away the mask and saw what the real devil looked like at that point. And so, there's a little bit less chatter on the emails I get that I've been seeing about this issue. But when I do see it, I either thank the person for sending it to me and letting me know, or I can say, where's the rest of the information? And I've been lucky that for the most part, actually, because I quote Dr. Peasley's name, it's not every day that you have a formalized nuclear professor in charge of nuclear studies at, if you went to, Joe Schmo University, it'd be one thing, but he's director of nuclear services at Notre Dame in Indiana. So you have a big name at a great school that everyone knows, there's very little to question about that school. And he came back with the first reading that we needed and said, really what bothered me, it's not that he said that he found it in the gear, but he found it in old gear and new gear that had never been used. So that was the realization for me that I was schmaying around playing firefighter in two sets of gear that were hurting me at the same time without me even knowing it. And I think what I like about your concept behind the book is that you're taking those black curtains away, Miranda, and you're covering these 5 major issues that many people, maybe most people, don't even know about these issues. And when we don't know, it's either because we choose not to know, okay, or we say, no, tell me about it. Let me learn more about it. That's what I did when I never heard of PFOS and PFAS. But once I talked with Diane the first time, I had stuff written down. I started looking it up, etc. I also saw that the NFPA is still doing it, is still requiring it. But we already know that there are 2 companies that make gear, the water flap or the wet flap, whatever you want to call it, in there, the barrier.
The DWR, yeah.
Is changed. It's for the better. Thank goodness. New gear is being made without PFAS and PFOS in it. It's a little bit more expensive, but again, it's not just supply and demand, it's where we are. Everything is getting more expensive. I just noticed magazine, I was reading Trade magazine yesterday, that if you asked for a new fire truck today, your committee had already met, you contact the manufacturer, you're going to wait 300 to 600 days before you get your apparatus. Whether it's a rescue truck, a pumper, an ambulance, a ladder truck, minimally 300 to 600 days. So we're talking about up to 5 years. And the costs have jumped by close to probably 50 to 60% of what they were prior to the pandemic. So, with all this being said, Miranda, let's talk about how you saw what Diane was doing and these other people that made you say, these are people I want to highlight
Yeah.
in this book.
Yeah. It's a long process, and there are a couple of elements to it. First of all, I'm a total unknown to all these people. I mean, yes, I had good credentials. I worked at the Washington Post, which most people would have heard of at that point. Um, and I'm going to people and saying, hey, it sounds to me like you have an issue that I want to write about, and I'd like to spend a lot of time talking to you. And I'm writing a book, but I don't have a contract yet. And so, they put a lot of faith in me to stick with it too. And that's a very interesting, I think, delicate dance that journalists have to do, because I believed ultimately I would get a book contract, which I did from the New Press, which is a very they're a nonprofit publisher focused really on social issues and social justice issues. And so really I think it's a very good fit for me and for them. But, for the longest time, I don't know, 3 years, I was talking to people and, I didn't have a book contract. But, I also know as a journalist, and I know this from covering tragedies, I know this from covering all kinds of issues, that people do want to talk about their experiences, and they're also trying to make sense of them. And so I sometimes have perspective on aspects of what they're doing just because I've covered this kind of stuff for a long time. So, that also, I think, sort of the information sharing, how do you write a public records request? Well, some people know, some people don't know. I certainly know, and that's useful information. So, there was sort of a give and take over time. Some of my reporting occurred during the pandemic, which was good and bad. I mean, obviously it's bad but people were home too and trying to fight these fights from their desks. And that made them more available to me, but it also made their fights that much harder. So, I don't know, you have to kind of obviously build trust. People don't like you, they're not going to talk to you. I mean, I'm not an ass-kissing person, pardon the expression, but I'm very straightforward about what I'm doing and who I am and where I am in all of this. And, either they want to work with me or they don't, but these folks did. And they all had different issues, which I was very interested in, because the unifying theme is secrecy. It's government secrecy, it's corporate secrecy, it's governments and corporations working together. In the case of the firefighters, it's governments, corporations, for a long time, the union, also working together to keep the public out. And that's the unifying theme. And that's what I was looking for, that are you encountering a problem in your community and your local government is not helping you? You think they're here to help you, but they're not helping you. Who else is involved? A local employer, a big industry, whatever. And so it all sort of came together. It took a long time. And I didn't get a book contract till 2023. Is that right? 23. Yes. April, right around 2 years ago, right around now. And that was great because I'd already reported most of the book at that point. So actually the writing process for me, and this is, my profession too, wasn't that hard. I mean, I'd done probably 95% of the reporting I needed to do, again, because people trusted me and felt like they could talk to me.
Could I just add that
Sure.
Miranda sat through so many NFPA meetings? I mean, that was she was really, she threw herself into understanding the institutions and the structures that were the many different planes of the issue that we were combating. Was, the hierarchy within the union, the industry, the collaborations between the industry and the union, the industry and the NFPA. And then the NFPA as a whole different animal that she gives a brilliant breakdown, from an outsider's view, Steve. We've heard NFPA all our lives in the fire world, but Miranda never dealt with that or understood that. And I'd like her to talk a little bit about her observations of that. I like what she wrote about that in the book. Yeah.
It's an interesting situation because there are other groups like the NFPA that are really private organizations, but function as, if not the regulators, at least the advisors to the government regulators who take their information very seriously. I mean, this is also in the electrical field and in other fields. There are these organizations that, are sort of quasi-governmental, really, even though they're private. I mean, they carry a lot of power and a lot of influence. And, some of that has to do with where the expertise is. So how many experts in government are there on firefighter turnout gear? I mean, I don't know the answer to that, but I know that there's a lot of reliance on these outside groups like the NFPA. And so, that's also a very interesting kind of circumstance because when functions, in this case, regulatory functions, are essentially outsourced, the government gives up, in some ways, its control of information and also doesn't often possess the information. It's in the hand of this outsider. Like when I was speaking at the beginning of the podcast about how I wanted outside contracts for, a local government, and this has nothing to do with firefighters per se, but then the contractor often controls the flow of information and will tell the government, well, we can't reveal that because if we reveal that, we're going to put some element of the industry at competitive risk. We're going to risk giving away secrets that will put this private enterprise at risk. And that, that's not necessarily the NFPA. Whereas if the government controlled all the information, we do have federal and state freedom of information laws that require governments to produce a lot of data, documents, and other kinds of information. So there's sort of a control issue too on the flow of information when you have an outside organization like NFPA. Secondly, when you look at the NFPA and other like similar organizations, there are a lot of people from the industry on there. There are some people from government on there. There are some people representing the firefighters on there. And so I asked the organization, I'll give them a little bit of credit. When I asked them questions, at least they attempted to answer me. They didn't blow me off, like, as you'll see some people in the book in other chapters did. I mean, some local governments just told me to pound sand, basically. But so my question to the NFPA is, okay, you got industry, you've got firefighters, you've got government people, experts, whatever. So is there a conflict of interest policy? What do you think the answer is, Steve?
No.
Correct. So now I'm thinking, wow, these people, this organization is functioning. Governments both nationally and locally take their advice. They help set the standards, if not create the standards that are then incorporated by, local governments who are buying firefighter turnout gear for their firefighters. And, these are sort of certified in a way and I'm saying that in air quotes because I'd have to go back and look. I don't remember, frankly, what NFPA, they may not use that term, but, they carry a lot of gravitas and their imprimatur is on this. And they say, okay, this group, here's the standard, and like the UV light test that Diane can talk more about knowledgeably than I can. But, who's setting that standard and who does it benefit? And the other problem, frankly, that I think the union still has, which is that they're suing the NFPA, but you know what? There are firefighters on those NFPA panels. There are representatives of the union on the panels. So you could sue the NFPA, but the NFPA, and they already came back and said this to the union, you guys were in on this. That's me saying that. That's a paraphrase, but you had people on our panels. So then who's protecting whom here?
Very, very good question to close the first session. I think what Diane started, not every community followed through on this, but they realized that the health of firefighters is important. And I know that from the reports I've received in trades, that I think they said every career department is working to change the gear and make sure they change out the what was the AFFF, the aqueous film foaming foam that we would use for flammable liquids or a plane crash. You'll see that. But fact is, once we have that, what do we do about it? And that's really the key. What do we do? It's nice to read all this stuff, but what can we do to make it better from ourselves? So we're going to take a break here, folks, with Miranda and Diane. When we come back, we're going to continue our discussion with Miranda and Diane about this terrific book that she's created, Backroom Deals in Our Backyards, How Government Secrecy Harms Our Communities and the Local Heroes Fighting Back. So as always, we'll be right back right after these words. Please stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to this episode of 5-Alarm Task Force with my top-notch guests. I got to say, I got a real power hand here with Miranda Spivack, a former reporter for the Washington Post, has gone on to write things on her own, and she has a book coming out in May, on May 6th, called Backroom Deals in Our Backyards. And if you have ever thought of concern or had a concern about, are your local politicians listening to you? Do they know what the public wants and not what they just want? Very, very important. And we were just talking a little bit about, again, how Diane is such a strong person, and what she did with the problems of PFAS and PFOS, both carcinogens, in the gear of almost every firefighter that has fought in this gear from several manufacturers. It was made with a known carcinogen into our bunker gear. That's the gear that the firefighters, whether it's yellow or white or black, doesn't make a difference of the color of their gear. But the fact is, inside that gear, most of it are carcinogens that are hurting and killing our brave firefighters, men and women alike. So to have Miranda include Diane and her efforts since way back in 2016, 9 years ago, it's hard to believe it's 9 years ago,
yeah.
That this is what needs to be done. And Diane is still fighting. Miranda brings us into focus, not just for this particular case with the PFAS and PFOS, but with other people that she's interviewed that have similar stories. We don't have the information from our local, regional, state, or federal departments to get the information needed. And it's supposed to be out there, but sometimes they make it very, very hard to find. So let's talk about, as we follow up, this section of the book where you used Diane for one of these 5. Again, it's very important for the readers of the book and the listeners of this podcast to know that this doesn't normally happen in a book. The author writes the book and leaves you to make of it as you wish. This book, you're not going to have that choice. You're going to have in your face information about why we're blocked so many times. We think, well, maybe they just don't believe in us. A lot more than that. I'm going to urge you to get out on May 6th and find your copy of Backroom Deals in Our Backyards. It'll be at all major booksellers. So that's the name of it. Remember it when we repeat it again at the end of the show. But this is what's causing a big stir. So, Miranda, I'm going to leave it to you and Diane to talk about her section.
Okay. So let me first say, Steve, thank you very much for all this, for letting people know about the book. I will say this, if this, you can pre-order the book. You don't have to wait till May 6th and it'll arrive on your doorstep on May 6th. Or you can go to your local bookstore if you're lucky enough to live in a place where you have a local bookstore and ask them to order it for you. But they're definitely pre-orders are happening now. And I will say this, having learned, I knew nothing about the book industry actually before I started on this, but pre-orders really matter. If you want the book to get the attention of reviewers, of other booksellers, of, people who want to invite people like Diane and me to talk about the book. If the book industry sees that there are a lot of pre-orders, that really causes them to pay attention. And so to amplify the stories even more. So if you can pre-order, please do. Shameless self-promotion here, I guess. But, and Steve, I can give you links that you can post along with the podcast if you wanted to do that about how to pre-order.
Sure,
So anyway, so why don't I just read a little bit about Ed Kelly, if that's okay with
sure.
you? And, because as you two have pointed out, Ed Kelly took over the presidency or general presidency of the International Association of Firefighters. So we do have Canadians also in this mix who are also subject to some of the same challenges that the US firefighters are. Ed is, as you all know, a pretty approachable guy. He's also a pretty savvy politician. I will say that about Ed. He's, in the true Massachusetts tradition of great politicians, he's definitely cut from that cloth. So Ed and I talked a couple of times, and but I felt, that he was fairly candid. And let me just read a little bit about what Ed said. And this is sort of towards the end of my reporting. And at this point, and it's 2023, Diane has gained a lot of credibility, which definitely she had to work hard to do. But people now, by this time in 2023, they're paying attention to her. She obviously knows what she's talking about. She has lined up, important scientific information and also helped, I might say, some of these studies that she mentioned. She's a little modest about that because she went to Congress. She's gone to a lot of different places to help get studies funded. So, and that's actually, who knows what's going to happen now. But that's a very, very important part of the role that she played. And again, who knows how to go to Congress and get them to appropriate funds for something? That is a learned skill. And, the lobbyists in DC all know how to do that. But people who aren't familiar with what is really a playbook, and Diane figured it out, which is pretty amazing. So in July 2023, Kelly sat in the lounge area of the AFL-CIO headquarters in Washington during a meeting of union presidents in DC and talked for more than an hour about what Diane had wrought. In 2020, when he was still the secretary treasurer of the union, he had commissioned an audit that turned up damaging information about overpayments to Schaeferger, former president now, for his pension, while he was collecting while working full-time as the union's president. Approximately $6 million in union funds were missing, Kelly said to me. The union later cleared Schaeferger of wrongdoing, saying that if he was overpaid in his pension, it wasn't his fault. Nevertheless, a federal criminal probe into Schaeferger was underway. This is now a direct quote from Kelly in my interview with Kelly. He said, the record keeping performed prior to my assuming office in September 2016 was so poor, one could argue it was designed that way. Kelly had written in a 2020 internal memorandum that was detailed in a news story in the newspaper Washington Free Beacon. Kelly in 2023 pointed to that audit and internal strife at the union to explain why he had been unable to address Diane's findings until he became union president. And I should say parenthetically right now, I don't know, Diane can tell you how many emails she sent to Ed Kelly, but they were voluminous, shall we say. And now here's another quote from Ed. When Diane was reaching out and trying to raise awareness, the role that I was in, we had stumbled upon various discrepancies in the management of the organization, he's talking about the union, that when taken in totality did not paint a pretty picture. My 18-hour days were consumed with trying to be sure the union would survive and decipher how to fix the place without going to jail. Not that he said that what Diane was raising was unimportant, but the union was in such turmoil, he said, he could not devote time to her concerns until he became president. So elsewhere, he says, talks about, and this was actually also during an interview with a filmmaker who made the film Burned, which Ed is in, and I watched some of the filming of that in Boston. And Ed said in that, we would not know about the problems with forever chemicals if not for the fighter fire's hero, Diane Cotter. And then he added, I feel bad that she had to go through everything she went through. Then I talk a little bit in the book about what I said about the union having been on these NFPA panels, or union members having been on the NFPA panels, and that might complicate their legal position. But that's up to them. I'm just illuminating it. And then Jim McGovern, another great Massachusetts politician. I mean, I know, to me, these guys are walking cliches or walking stereotypes in a way, because they're really out of the Tip O'Neill version of politics, which is all politics is local in the end. And, they're very adept at this, Anyway, so I did talk to Jim McGovern also, who represents Worcester, as you may know, where Diane and Paul were at the time that this all began. So anyway, and he was also chairman of the House Rules Committee, which is a very, very important committee that decides what legislation gets on the floor and in what format. And that was when the Democrats were in charge of the House, which they're not now, obviously. But I said he was one of the first politicians to support Diane. He said he found Diane both intimidating and very effective. Guy's very honest, I thought. Initially, he said, he, like others in state and local government, were skeptical of her claims. Diane's longstanding efforts to get Massachusetts state officials interested in the possibility of poison firefighter gear were extremely frustrating to her. And then he says, further down, he says, everybody who meets her can never forget her. Also true. When politicians put her on a merry-go-round to get her off their back, she would have none of it. Very true. But she is right. She is not being unreasonable. What was unreasonable was how goddamn long it took for the government to acknowledge that this was an issue. At the end of the day, she is responsible for moving us in a direction that will ultimately save lives. People who later will benefit from her advocacy will have no idea who she is. And that's what Jim McGovern said about Diane.
Nice words.
Yeah. Yeah. And, look, Diane, and she'll tell you this too. You said something about in your face, and that's actually a phrase I use in the book to describe her in some respects. And you know what? I think to be an effective advocate, you got to be in their faces. And, you know, and you have to sort of, you know, operate on many different levels. But, you know, if you don't keep pushing and as Jim McGovern said, be a little intimidating too. They don't pay attention. I mean, we're talking about people who are not going to make big campaign finance donations, which of course does help get the attention of politicians. I mean, look at Elon Musk, for example. You know, Diane's not going to do that. Firefighters, okay, the union has a political action committee. They, you know, there are some donations. The union itself might have some clout, but they weren't carrying the ball on this until very recently. So, you know, people like Diane, other people in the book, these are not politically active people who have money to throw around. And it's, you know, and we know money talks in this country in a big way in politics. So it isn't that. So then you got to be in their face and you got to be right.
The thing that Jim McGovern had to navigate was how to deal with me and the union at the same time. So you're talking the years 16 through 20 through early 2021. And you and I have spoken about this so many times too, both Miranda and Steve, is how do you speak to this issue if you are a congressional and you're communicating with Diane Cotter, but you better not say her name because then you can't go to the union and disclose that you're communicating with Diane Cotter. So there were very few congressionals that would say my name in those dark war years. And Jim always did, along with Senator Shaheen. So, and when you speak about how to navigate those channels, it was Senator Shaheen. I love this story because it's so funny and it includes Dr. Peasley. But with Senator Shaheen, she gave us the NIST studies. Well, she gave us the NIST studies because I was such a major pain in the ass for studies, along with Rob Bilott, who was right next to me fighting for these studies, along with Jim McGovern, along with Dr. Peasley. So you have to figure when I was communicating in those early years, organizing, I would get to Dr. Peasley and ask him for input in these discussions. And that's how the NIST study came about. So I'm very proud of Senator Shaheen for that for us.
Diane, explain a little bit about what the NIST study is studying.
That's the National Institute for Science and Technology. So they commissioned early in 2021 a 4-part series of studies on structural firefighter turnout gear and PFAS. And those directly came from Senator Shaheen, who was in that time ahead of the Appropriations Committee. So now, remember, this is in the year 2020 and 2021. We had actually commissioned that study in 2019, but it didn't get passed until 2020, and then it has to go for appropriations. It's such a long, drawn-out process, but that is the way how things are done. So you think because something passes in the House, it passes in the Senate, or vice versa is not always the way. But Senator Shaheen was the chairperson or the leader of that very powerful Senate organization at that point in time. Now, funny story about that. So working with her team up until a week prior to that signing or to that announcement that she was going to give us almost $2 million to appropriate the first round of studies, I asked her, has the IAFF signed on yet? And her congressional aide said to me, no, we haven't spoken to them yet, but who should we speak to? So I gave them a name of who to speak to. Now I'm going to fast forward about 6 months and I see an an IAFF Toxic and Substances Facebook Live event where Harold Schaitberger is being given the credit for getting that study. And I had so much fun that day. I look back at it now, but I was pretty infuriated, and I remember screaming at the top of my voice, "You tell Harold Schaitberger he had nothing to do with that." But I wanted people to see in my outrage that this is how it's done. This was how the picture was painted, that he was dipping his toe in, but not navigating it and absolutely obstructing information from getting to his members. What's funny is 1 week before our study came out in June of 2020, Pat Morrison finally did call Dr. Peasley after, many efforts for me to get them together. And I remember Dr. Peasley and I having a conversation where he advised me that he did speak with Pat, and that he said to the effect of, "Yeah, Pat, Diane got that in this study, not Harold." I thought that was terrific. But that's how it's done. I'm not the only person that happens to when you're talking about a passionate project and people claiming a portion of their effort in it as a leader in that effort, but omitting the work of their allies. It was difficult. It was just one of the very difficult challenges in that same lane that we had in those years.
I can imagine what it was like, because a couple of friends that I spoke with, they said, "Well, I'm fine. I'm 38 years in. I've been in the department for 15 years." And you're just waiting for the shoe to drop.
Right.
He says, "Well, there's no shoe." I said, "Yes, there is a shoe." Did you wear that gear? He goes, "Yeah." That's how often? He goes, "I don't know, depending on the alarms, 4, 5, 6 times a day." "Okay, what if it's a 3-hour call? You have any change of gear?" He goes, "Nope." I said, "Okay, well, that's the problem." Goes,
just touching it.
Yeah.
I mean, just touching the gear, with so much of it coming right off in your hands. The thing I have to remind everyone is, you're not talking about a Tupperware container, or you're not talking about a plastic straw. You're talking about the most highly fluorinated textile known to science. That's the difference here.
Exactly.
That's the difference.
Exactly. But the other side doesn't want to acknowledge that. They want to just make up whatever they can to fight back the stories.
Of
So at
course.
least, thanks, Dr. Cabral Martinez and the other doctors who are working on this. Like I said,
Jeff Burgess. I mean, we have such a great panel of doctors now from across the nation and beyond. It's phenomenal.
Yeah, when I have to visit an ER, I always ask them, how many patients are you getting back with firefighters that had a disease or possible carcinogen contact? And he says, "Well, right now we're getting quite a few."
Right.
And yet none of them came beside the acquisition that I put out there, that anybody can come on the show for free and talk about what bothers them. And one guy wrote back, he was, "I'm working on it. And I got a call, an email from him on Friday of last week that I didn't actually see it till Saturday, that changes that whole ball. But the fact is that lots of jobs are dangerous. But in those jobs, most people know what they're doing. So when a large part of a crane collapses and they find out it was the position of the crane that was incorrect, you give them a bracelet to let them know you're part of the party now. And I've been using those blue markers everywhere I go. And usually a day or two after, we're going to go back to that fire station. Next, all of a sudden, you see people working on the gear. Hey, what's going on? BGFG.
Steve?
Yes, sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah. So when the book comes out in May, what do you think will be the first not thinking about it reaction?
Uh, you know, I suppose the short answer is I don't know. The book has already been reviewed by Publishers Weekly, which is a very significant trade publication in the book industry, and got a very good review. So I'm hopeful that that will be replicated in other venues, but we'll see. They described the book as an enraging expose of a nationwide culture of corruption, and also one that has sort of escaped attention. So it's really hard to say. I'm doing everything I can, and Diana's helping, and other folks in the book are also helping to get the word out now about the book. I think that is actually very important. And we'll see. I hope it's well received. I can't say much beyond that.
Well, I think the facts that you presented, and between the two of you, especially the role that Diane played in her ball game that she had, and she still has. I mean, it's still, you're still fighting every day, right?
Yeah. Got to go for the justice now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think, the question will be, and I think somebody a couple of years ago, they filed, I think, a suit in the U.S. court against the manufacturer for, I think, the entire cost of that department's bunker gear. That was, I think, new as of, I think it was around 2020, 21, maybe, where they were going to charge for every piece of gear that the firefighters were using.
Right.
And then added a penal amount besides the value of the gear for a penalty. I don't know where they are with it now, but I actually clapped when I read it, that they did that. And I think that gets them to realize that,
well, it should be. We should be looking at that. We should be looking at the justice end of this. We have the best legislation nationally now for this issue, and the most fabulous scientific studies keep coming out. Every week we're seeing more studies come out for firefighters and PFAS. And we have over 10,000 firefighters suing the gear manufacturers. But we are still lacking the investigations for the public knowledge on this issue. And that's my next lane, is to force those investigations.
Right.
The who knew what, when did they know it, what did they do about it?
And then why did they just push it through as if it was nothing when they knew the truth from the first day they sat at that table and heard that presentation?
Exactly, Steve.
That's the key.
Exactly.
Because listen, boards of companies play all sorts of games. Right? And the game they hate the worst is, oops, they found out.
Well, my opinion is that this was very easy to hide firefighter cancer behind products of combustion. That this could go unnoticed for as long as it did, because firefighters are all going to get cancer from toxic smoke anyways.
It was interesting. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
which we've never, ever, ever denied. We know the products of combustion are deadly. What we didn't know was, you've got backdraft meeting radium girls times dark waters. That's essentially how I frame this in one sentence.
Right, right. The other thing is that my concern is how do we keep this using Miranda's book, what you've been doing? How else can we help?
I think Miranda's book has phenomenal information on what to do. She's dedicated 2 chapters on what you can do as an individual, and then what your rights are and where to look for things as a citizen activist.
Miranda, can you touch upon that a little bit, please?
Yeah, I mean, I think Diane's story and the story of the 4 other accidental activists are in themselves guidebooks for how to make change in your community. First of all, to identify the issues, but half the time people don't even know what's going on. I do attribute some of that to the decline of local news coverage. So, if residents are not going to the city council meeting, maybe nobody's going to the city council meeting. And of course, the minutes are never complete. So, each one of these stories you can read and say, ooh, that's how this person did that. Or, oh, this is how they got that piece of information. I should try that. Or here's how they identified allies. Or here's how they built a network. I mean, all of that has to be done. And, the other thing that I think is really important in the book, Diane's right, there's sort of how-to guides, really specific guides at the end of the book. Again, with more examples and, very specific things on how to write a, public records request, what to do if you get stonewalled, all this kind of stuff. But, I think that, I'm eager to get the book into the hands of young people, actually, right now. I think they are the next people who really need to be educated, and I mean that in a nice way, about what they can do and that they do have agency and power, and that there is also strength in numbers. I mean, I'll tell you one thing about politicians. If you give them, if you write them a letter and say, I have this problem, blah, 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 they may or may not respond to you. But if you write a letter or an email or whatever and say, I have this problem. I discovered it in my community where there are 10,000 other people who are experiencing the same problem. And that's, certainly the case of poisoned drinking water, the lousy sewer system that these folks in Alabama have had to endure. So numbers really matter. And you need to be able to say, it's not just me and my family, it's thousands of other people that you represent and could turn you out of office. Of course, that's the implication. You don't necessarily have to say that. But they know, and they'll pay attention. So even if you don't have money, which most of us don't, and, campaign contributions, I'm sorry to say, in this country do matter, but numbers matter too.
Right. That's important. And thank you for that. I was just thinking, Diane, that shortly before I learned about our issue, PFAS, I had a former firefighter from I think Providence, and he told me that they had just had a month before the interview, they had an emergency where they just went to a dumpster fire. Now, for 60 plus years, dumpster fires are always we call them a pain in the butt, right? Because you get up at 2:30 in the morning for a dumpster fire, and you were back maybe in 20 minutes to a half hour, and you thought everything was fine, and you went back to bed. Problem is that a lot of those fires in the dumpsters produce hydrogen sulfide gas, and we didn't have detectors back then initially. Mm-hmm. So it masks itself when someone's exposed to look like a cardiac issue. So they told me that their assistant chief, who was on that call, as he was getting back to the station, was saying he wasn't feeling well. And he felt a little tight in the chest. So luckily they rushed him to the hospital, and this firefighter went with him to the hospital because they were basically friends, not only at the station but friends outside of the work as well. And it was showing like a cardiac issue. And this firefighter told them, what is the chance of hydrogen sulfide gas exposure? Excuse me. And he said, well, do you know for a fact? I said, we think so. We have meters coming in, but we don't have them yet.
Oh,
And so, but they got him to the hospital in time, and he was able to be taken care of and walked out on his own power a couple of days later, and
Good
went back to work a week later. But we didn't know about hydrogen. I had heard about hydrogen sulfide gas, but I didn't know where it came from. I didn't know how obvious it was, and so
Right
much of the
there.
stuff that we use, from the plastics and stuff like that. And there were a lot of other off gases, but this one for sure is a killer. And that was just before you and I talked for the first time. And so I think that's one of the reasons why this stays so in the front of my mind, is because we almost lost that firefighter, that assistant chief, that night. And we have lost, sadly, brothers and sisters to this. How do I put it without cursing? How to deal with this issue, and how far we've come really in a short time, considering how long it would have normally taken to get any feedback back on Paul's situation, other
Right.
than medical. You know what? We know what the medical was. We're not talking about that. What else can be done? And from that, and from you, we've learned that. We've learned that you can forge ahead. You have to have find the best doctors. Don't be satisfied with the homegrown local internist or, just a paramedic. Paramedics are great for what they do in the field, and they're big helpers in the hospitals. But the fact is, none of us really knew about this, that it was a real issue facing us. And we found out it was. And I think that's the key. And I think what you're bringing, and Miranda, what you're bringing in the book to the readers, is to know that that wall can come down. There's a wall that can come down.
Definitely it can. I will say this, you said it's been 9 years or whatever. These are not quick fights, and that is something people need to be prepared for. The other examples in the book, these are all decade-long fights helmed by one individual who sticks with it, builds a network, et cetera. But, you do need to build a network, because you need to share the work, and you need to be able to sort of pace yourself too, because there's so much to do to get the attention of people. So I don't want to sound discouraging at the end of the podcast, but I think, people need to be prepared. And this is why you really have to spread the word about all of this, to enlist all the help you can get. I mean, Diane getting to Graham Peasley was a huge, huge turning point.
Absolutely.
But, that was several years ago. And as you said, it's still going on.
John Marr, Station Pride. I mean, he took such a chance doing what he did.
He sure did.
Yeah.
He sure did. But he was adamant.
So, yeah. And I think you have to be adamant, and you have to be prepared to dig in.
Right. When you talk to them, you need to be polite. But when you're out of their earshot, you can call them any name you want, because you want to get this taken care of, and that's the key.
Yeah.
But what I think this also proves is we can fight City Hall.
We can fight City Hall.
Yes.
Yeah.
We can fight City Hall, and we can win. Okay.
Yeah.
Certain things we're going to win when we fight against City Hall, because they would rather have us quiet and stated rather than still be itching and scratching the cat litter to find find our way. We know our way. We know it has to be done, and we're ready to fight to get it done. And I think
That's
this
right.
book, that just backs this up 100%. It just say that, yes, you can fight. It doesn't have to be just the kind of fight that Diane is fighting. It can be any other type, but you can beat it. You can control it if you work towards it. And we know from a fact that, Diane, when nights would probably, she only slept 2 or 3 hours because she would get up and write a note for the next day. See, I know you will. Write a note and then go back to sleep. And then in the morning gets up and see that note, and boom, she does it. And I think that's what our listeners and our viewers have to realize. You can fight. You can fight through video. You can fight through audio. You can fight through letters, emails, etc. And emails don't cost you a penny. They're all free, no matter how many you send. And use that weapon. They're a great weapon. Diane and I found it. And we found it partially for the nonprofit, but we don't get discouraged. We may be a little sad, but we get up and say, okay, I'm a big boy. I'm a big girl. I can take care of this and do it.
Absolutely.
And that's what we want to do. We want to empower the people who are listening, who are watching this. And when the book comes out, read that book, and they're going to learn just how, I won't say easy, but it is possible to fight back and to win.
Yep.
And that's the key. That's the takeaway from all this. I know how much work Diane has put into this, and it doesn't stop. And I'm sure that you're doing the background studies for this book, you found the same thing. There were tough people to talk with and easier people to talk with. And sometimes we can always see that little black tail waving behind them, which signals they may not be talking in truths. And so when you see that little tail wag, be careful. But don't give up. That's the key. Both of you have really taught us that now. Don't give up. Fight. Might not be an easy fight, but fight till you're knocked down and out. Because otherwise, it's just going to pass on as the same thing to the next group, the next generation, etc. We can't let that happen. Can't let that happen. Part of the fact that our membership is so low in fire departments, both paid and paid career and both in the duals, partial paid and partial volunteer, is that they're learning more about the dangers of firefighting that have nothing to do really with firefighting. You go to a three-decker, like we knew in the greater Boston area, the three-deckers, and you just don't think they're not going to listen to me. Yeah, I got my sister and her kids downstairs, and on the floor, our parents on the ground floor. But you can't give up because you lost one battle. There's still a war to be fought, and sometimes our soldiers get nicked, get wounded when they fight, but they keep on fighting. And we have to do the same thing with following Diane's lead and follow what you share in the book with us. I think it's a great recipe to teach people that you don't have to sit and make believe you're satisfied with the status quo. You have to get up and fight for what is right and what you believe in. And even if it fails, you tried. You look back. We talked about that several times in our conversations, that you can't let a fight, losing one fight, mar the whole effort to bring safety to firefighters. And I think the book is going to help very much share that you can reach out. You can do something about what's wrong in your community. And it's time now for you to fight back. And I think this
So
book,
well said, Steve.
I think this book is going to be like a roadmap for many
It,
people.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
very much.
It's phenomenal.
It is, and I feel blessed that the two of you chose me
Thank
to
you, Steve. We are grateful.
to do this. I would have to say this is one of the breakstones of doing these 9 years of podcasts. This was one of the some of the top tens without a doubt.
Oh,
And
thank you, Steve.
I'll as soon as you send me the links for the pre-sale, I'll put those on our website and
Right.
in our emails as well. And I wish you all the luck. I think maybe the capital P should be in your future. Love to see that. Even if I'm an old man by then, well, I'm an old man already, but if I'm older man at then, to see you get the Pulitzer. If I was able to, I'd come to Washington to see it, see you receive it. But you definitely deserve it, without a doubt in my mind, after talking with you today. And I can't wait to read the book.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much. It's great to be on your podcast. I want to spread the word near and far. So if anybody listening wants me to come to their community or talk online to their community group or whomever, I'm happy to do that. I really just want to get the word out so people can figure out how to manage
I can use
their lives.
Can I use your email?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Right,
absolutely.
I'll put that in.
I'll send, for sure.
All right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you both very much for your time. I know you have the call to make, but thank you, both of you, for the time and the effort to be here today.
Thank you for being along for the ride for 9 years, Steve.
Yeah. It's
we couldn't have done it without you.
Yes, you could. I'm just
it's the network. It's the network.
It's the network. That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Everybody be
Thanks,
well.
Steve. We'll wait for your next email or whatever.
Okay.
Right?
Will do.
Thank you, my friend.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, this will end the video portion of the podcast, and we'll also be having our audio version edited and put out to you very soon. Thanks for tuning in. We always like to see you. Be safe, be well, and let's remember to take care of each other. Bye-bye now.